Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Career Corner Coffee Chats, or C4. We are doing these great series of coffee chats around the theme of beyond the degree, crafting a career with purpose. And so I have two very special guests today. I'm very excited. They recently attended and were on the Connexus conference, and I'll actually be watching a webinar of theirs in about a couple hours. I'm very excited to have them on the show. We have Jessica Thornton and Heather Russick, co-presidents of Creative Futures Studio. And they're going to be talking about the future of careers. So first of all, we'll start with Jessica. And Jessica is an anthropology grad from the U of T. She's a futurist, facilitator, strategist, and creative problem solver with over 15 years of experience in the public and nonprofit sectors. And Heather is a life sciences grad from Queens. And she is a strategist, researcher, designer with more than 15 years experience in policy innovation, healthcare, leadership, management consulting, program management and strategy. Welcome to the Coffee Chat.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Very excited to have you here. Now, I will admit I was taking a look at your LinkedIn and trying to see how your career paths and how they all went. But so you both had very interesting career paths. Now, but that seemed to converge at OCAD University in a program called Strategic Foresight and Innovation. So is that how you met and how Creative Futures came about, or?
Great question. And I think that there's definitely, because of OCAD, some great synergies happen, but we actually connected at the Brookfield Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, now called the DAIS, that's based at Toronto Metropolitan University. And so we were both working in very different roles, but ended up collaborating on a project called Employment in 2030, exploring the futures of work. And so we together sort of dug into this topic, even though it wasn't necessarily what was particular to either of our specific roles at the Institute, but because we both have the background from OCAD in strategic foresight, we were able to advocate and successfully do that incredible initiative. And really from there, our work aligned so well. And then when we founded Creative Futures a number of years later, it just made sense that we continue working together. And I think because OCAD taught us so many of the same skill set that we really brought to everything we did, it meant that our working styles aligned, and we both kind of had the same vision of what we wanted to do and help organizations.
That's great. That's great. Now, tell us a little bit about Creative Futures. Actually, how did that come about, and what is Creative Futures?
Great question. So Creative Futures, so we use applied strategic foresight, basically futures thinking tools to help nonprofit and public sector municipalities, hospitals, universities, nonprofit organizations understand, prepare, and how to navigate their possible futures. So we basically work with leaders to help them move from making decisions based on their past to really making decisions based on their futures. And so Creative Futures was actually born of the pandemic, identifying that we were at a particular moment when organizations felt a high degree of uncertainty and not sure what to do, but they couldn't stop and wait and listen, especially if you are, a municipality, a hospital, you still had to keep operating. And so we work with a number of organizations such as the City of Calgary, who is very much trying to still make decisions that really understood where they could be. And so we saw an opportunity of organizations and leaders really needing what strategic foresight can provide for them. But wasn't necessarily part of their toolkit. So that's what we do and continue to do now.
Nice. Such important works and such a lovely way to look at it as opposed to looking in the past. Actually looking at the future to make decisions. It seems easy, right? It seems like logical, but yeah, a lot of don't do that. So, um, now in January, you published an amazing report on the future of work, where you identified the top 10 major changes that are shaping the future of work and workers. What are those changes?
Yeah, good question. So last year, Jessica and I did research to inform the report that came out earlier this year. We did kind of secondary research, but we also talked to career development practitioners across Canada, as well as users of career services. And they could have used career services in the past, or they imagined potentially using career services in the future. So we
Okay.
used all of that data to really inform this report and this research. But the 10 changes in terms of the highlights, the first one I'm sure is not a surprise to anyone, but it's called Work Anywhere. So, as
Mm,
we all know, COVID-19 really did change so many things about how we live, work, and play. But one of the big ones is the transition to remote work and really creating the conditions to work from anywhere. So, across borders, with tons of mobility, and really being able to work for any company in the world.
mm,
The second one is, again, not a surprise, AI and automation. There is so much development happening around AI right now, a ton of investment from a
mm,
ton of different organizations across all sectors is going into AI. And this is likely going to change work significantly over the next
mhm,
number of years. The third one is living with climate change. So this is, we last year was a record wildfire season in 2023. So we anticipate wildfires, heat waves, drought storms increasing over time, but also impacting air quality, food production, disease emergence, and many other factors, and potentially impacting lots of the ways we work and skills that might be
right.
needed in the future. The fourth one is geopolitical conflicts. So, there's lots of shifting global powers, conflict, natural disasters that are happening, creating a lot of complexity globally, but from our perspective, will have impacts locally as well.
Mhm,
The fifth one is reconciling the impacts of colonization. So there is a
mm,
growing awareness of all of the impacts of colonization and just how much we need to pay attention to this and how much this is going to impact workers and skills and employers going forward.
mhm,
The sixth one is economic precarity. So we are all, I think, well aware of this, but the cost of living and affordability is going way
yeah.
up. It's a challenge for many, many residents of Canada. And this is really being accelerated by the housing crisis. And there are a growing number of people who are food insecure across
Right.
Canada as a result. The seventh one is globalization under pressure. So, COVID 19 and global conflicts have really challenged some of the principles of globalization and really are resulting in more focus on a localized economy and
Mm,
potentially really countries really focusing on having supply chains locally rather than having such a globalized network of economic powers. The eighth one is education disrupted. So this is really talking about how actually post-secondary uh, sector might shift over time and how
mm,
hiring practices are starting to really focus, instead of focusing on credentials, really focusing on skills. As well, post-secondary,
right.
the cost of post-secondary is going way up for many
Yeah.
students. As well, at the same time, there's a lot of free online learning platforms that do exist. So we expect kind of the mix of how people continue to learn might shift over time. The ninth one is about mental health and well-being. So there has been a ton, mental health challenges have accelerated in recent years, in
Mm,
part because of COVID-19, but also because of economic precarity, because of climate anxiety, and because of the increased use of technology in our day-to-day lives. And then the last change is really around generational shifts and how values and how people are seeing work and their careers changing is different across different generations.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, kind of the oldest part of the workforce are working longer and working well, having a much longer career. So there's a number of different generational dynamics happening at the same time.
That's really interesting. It's funny, I've never really considered a lot of those topics. Of course, are front of mind. We see them, the climate change, et cetera, et cetera. But I'd never really thought about them in the career work perspective, and how could effective work. But of course, all of those things will affect our world, which will then affect how we work, where we work, how we see work, what work we can do. So yeah, those are amazing. Now, knowing that, so knowing these 10 very important future trends. I can't even call them trends because a lot of them are happening right now. It's not really a trend. This is, it's happening, and we have to adapt. But as a student or a new grad, as we have, those our audience. How would taking this knowledge affect how you approach your career, maybe, and how can someone be ready to meet those challenges?
Such a great question, because I think so many of the changes Heather just mentioned, I think they can feel really heavy and daunting. And, hearing that something like AI could completely shift and change how we do so many things can be a bit overwhelming. And I think so many of the stats we hear out there in terms of, however many percentage of careers that we'll have don't even exist yet, or that you're going to have this many careers in your lifetime. I think it can be really easy as a student or recent graduate to feel very overwhelmed by that information. And I can totally understand that and can remember being that person as well. But I think so much of the work Heather and I do is helping people understand how these different changes aren't completely certain. And there's this level of uncertainty embedded. And so we don't know exactly how they will mature over time. And so to make sense of that, and so we can actually feel like we have some ability to make decisions still, because we still have to make decisions.
Right.
We actually use this information to develop a few possible scenarios that are also in a report that really explore different possible futures of work and careers that could emerge based on these trends intersecting and emerging. So for instance, there is a scenario where we might see remote work and AI lead to this very digital, even more digital and globalized work environment than even today. But at the same time, there's a possible scenario that's almost the opposite, that's a bit more disconnected, and that we see the impacts of climate change and some of these more global conflicts lead to a bit more of a slower, back to the basics type of world. And then there's other possibilities where actually the future is not so much about the work we do, but who we are and our hobbies, because we work so much longer into our life that we actually think about it more as, what is the value I need to give to community, and what do I as an individual and family want to spend my time doing? So all that to say, there are so many different possible futures of work. And so the very best way to prepare is to embrace the uncertainty and learn to learn. A growth mindset will help so many of us in this current moment, and even more so in the future, to continue to adapt and learn and be comfortable moving beyond any type of fixed mindset. I think so much, especially with technology, tells us that we can learn everything we want about artificial intelligence today, and all of that will be different in 3 years. And so I think we just have to be able to continue to embrace different learning styles and different learning of information over time, and to really just avoid having fixed preconceptions about what we think the future might be.
More than ever, that, as you said, that lifelong learning, which we're even, I would say, at my age, many, 112 years old, I was told even back in my time, you'll always be learning, you should always be learning. But I think now how quickly things move. I think in 5 years, how much my job has changed. At the beginning of the pandemic, we never did virtual appointments. It was unheard of. And no, we will never work remotely. We're an in-person university, sort of all those things. 3 years later, I'm doing podcasts virtually with two guests, and I'm meeting my clients virtually, and I get to work from home 2 days a week. That's just 3 years. So it's unbelievable how quickly things move. So yeah, that lifelong learning, being able to embrace change, I think is going to be important. Um, we could go on all day. I have so many questions for you, but we want to keep this short. And thank you so much for being here. I do have one final question though for you to go with our theme, and I don't know if you each want to take turns answering it, but our theme is beyond the degree, crafting a career with purpose. How does that resonate with each of you, and what advice would you give students and alumni listening?
Yeah, beyond the degree. I love the framing of it, just because I am a life sciences grad. I did a life sciences degree. It feels like a long time ago now, but also my own career has gone in many different directions. It definitely has not been linear. Same with Jess. We've kind of experimented and tried a lot of different jobs and careers over time. But from my perspective, that's actually been super beneficial to work across sectors, to work in different organizations. I think my advice would be to not be afraid of doing things like that, that there are so many transferable skills that can be applied in tons of different organizations, in tons of different roles. And that because there's so much change happening in the external environment, by having these changes happen, you're just automatically better prepared for the next change to come, because
Right.
you've already done it. You've already experienced it. You've had to go through that learning curve in a new organization, in a new sector. So you know you can do it again, and continue to do it. As well, Jess and I, even though we have done a lot of post-secondary education, we are constantly thinking about the new things we need to learn to stay informed about what's happening in the external environment. It doesn't end. Our learning does not end. And I think to stay relevant, it's super important to continuously learn, and to find opportunities to learn as you keep going in your career.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you mentioned, there are so many opportunities with these online learning platforms now. So you really can. Jess, anything to add to that, or did Heather sum it all up?
I think she summed it up so well. I think the only other thing I'd maybe add is, thinking about our career and what we want our future to be. It's so important to think about how our career with purpose actually serves that broader visions of what we want our futures and our lives to be. And I think it can be, especially as a student or a recent graduate, to become really focused on what is the job I'm going to have. And I think so much of the work, Heather and I have come to reflect on, what is the life we want to have? What is the work we want to do? What are the type of people we want to work with? What type of value do we want? But also, how do we want our broader life to fit into that picture? And I think it's so important to think about our futures as our career being an element of it, but how it fits in a broader system of that future that we want. So I think that's the only other thing I would say and reflect on.
It's so true. We're not just work, and I think it's so important to consider that, and to work towards something you're passionate about. So what problem do you want to solve? I always say, right? And there's so many ways to do it, no matter what program you're in and what you do. So this has been so interesting. Thank you so much for both of you for giving your time. I know you're both very busy. You have new projects you're working on and such. So thank you both so much for being here. Really appreciate the time that you've donated to this.
Great. Thanks for inviting us. This is great.
Thank you so much. Now, to learn more a little bit about these not trends, again, this report and other reports that they have, check out Creative Futures website at creativefutures.studio. I have that right, I think. So tons of great reports on there, all around what's coming 2040 and these important things to be aware of. Thanks everyone for listening once again, and we'll see you next time on the Career Corner Coffee Chat. Take care. Bye.